A summary of this episode: reading the sky, bubbles, sync profiles, Momatus, hexagon patterns. Self-learning without help is an old, slow, expensive and dispiriting process. Telepathy does not work either. Teaching without clear ground school notes also produces staccato progress. Did you think that learning a language was a waste of time? Soaring and flying successful cross country is not luck or bravery, but understanding the physics and interpreting what you see ahead. Reading the sky is like being able to understand another language, which can be learnt. Herewith then, the translation book, Clouds, Ground, Sky, Motion to English. Available from the BJ shop or directly from me. Reading the sky then. Too little or too much? Reading the sky, seeing and observing cloud rotation is important, but it is difficult. Looking at cloud rotation, what are you seeing and what is actually happening out there? And the eyes can be tricked. So if we look at this visual illusion, if we look at any black spot, the other black spots seem to be the center point for rotating circles. And it's quite natural and normal for you to see, to believe that there is rotation going on when in fact it's not. The dominant force then for any sky is the setup of instability. So in the UK we have our westerly wind and it's generally wet or damp. If the wind is more northerly, then it brings drier air, which is at the same temperature and pressure is heavier than humid air. Nighttime cooling creates an inversion and the bottom layer becomes very stable as it cools. In the morning then, the sun heats the ground, which heats the air, and it warms such that the air below the inversion reaches the same temperature as dry, heavy air above the inversion. The inversion breaks and heavy, dry air pours down, generating instability, and humid thermals rise as vortices. With high pressure sat on top of us, the air simply becomes stable with a strong inversion. The air mass can be split into air layers and blocks. So here we have the horizontal layers, and we're talking about an area the size of the country, or the county, or the area of Wales. So fairly large areas. And each of those layers has got temperature and humidity within it. As the sun comes up, the bottom layer is modified by vertical blocks. So we get blocks within the layers. And these, of course, can be modified by pressure. So we can get sea breezes and convergence. And effectively, the sky, when we look at it, is a game of dynamic chess. And you thought chess was a hard game. When we look at the Rayleigh number, we need to consider instability now caused by humid air and not just temperature. So Rayleigh's number determines whether vortex will or will not form. And previously we looked at this and said that essentially this block here, which is G, viscosity, conduction, and expansion as being a constant. However, there's a problem because this is not a constant, this bit here, because this is the conduction of the same air mixture to within itself, whereas humidity is going to change that. There will be no conduction in a humid, i.e. a thermal which is rising because of humidity. So this whole block is no longer constant. So thermal stability, considering the differing reaction to rising thermals, i.e. hot air, to descending cold air, versus humids to descending cold dry air. We find humids offer greater stability, as there will be almost no entrainment and no change in the rising air mass buoyancy, and make solid, well-formed cumulus clouds. Thermals are slightly smaller, that is hot air. They are unstable in their structure, and they suffer entrainment and produce weaker-looking clouds. So when we're heading for clouds, it's a bit like game of chess, but as we set off for them, determining which is the best cloud to go for, to our dismay, the clouds have changed as we're approaching them, and the strong cloud and thermal is no longer what we thought it was. The wind brings our weather. The lowest layer and level of air block properties are modified by what it drifts over or around. So here we have the 3 sea breezes affecting the UK, introducing more humid and cooler air at the lowest levels. Hills, on the other hand, generate a foehn effect, drying the air to the east, whilst different sea temperatures affect humidity and temperature. Reading the sky. A simple suggestion, but what does it mean? We have to use every bit of information that is available. What exactly are you looking at, seeing, and understanding? The dominant physical force driving the structure and how it is modified. Instability and sink from cloud generated by breaking the inversion. The sun, the wind, the inversion, a sea breeze, topography, that you're cruising over flat land, the proximity of the coast, the hills, the colour of the fields, towns, thermal triggers, etc. On-track features relating weather to the desired track. Sun amounts on the ground. Wind at the surface and cloud base. The height of cloud bases, and they'll tend to be lower in the sea breezes. Upper cloud, including irritating cirrus. Our diversions where we might have to land, usually pre-planned on a declared task. Features for airspace, again usually pre-planned from route study. And now we have a cumulus short-term memory test and structure. Cloud dissipation might hide a thermal bubble. So a very large cloud, all we see is a very large cloud. But within that, there may well be another thermal going up, refeeding it. Then we have to look for that. We need to look at clouds to identify their potential. A lower cloud indicates a sea breeze or more humid air and cooler air. Higher cloud bases then are better. Moist air tends to be rougher, i.e. more unstable. Watch out for clouds without flat bases. Higher cloud base is hotter. Cloud hazy structure and misty is dying. Collect all information about cloud. Anticipate them like the traffic lights. Cloud indicates moisture content, i.e. that the air that's rising has hit the dew point. The greater the cloud, the bigger the cloud, the greater amount of humidity was in the thermal. Cloud instability. Not all bubbles form from below the cloud base. Traces show how often thermals are, and you can relate that to cloud base. So when you're on a cruise, note on the trace how many thermals you bound through, probably rejected. The daily cycle of a thermic day is not a steady curve to hot, but extends strong much later in the day. So reading the sky is a bit like reading several different sheets of music at the same time that are also changing and moving. Reading the sky includes the structure of sync. Clouds. Cloud base is often controlled by adjacent mountain tops. The higher the mountains, the higher the cloud base. Katabatic winds flow down the mountains and anabatic winds upwards. Friction can reinforce instability, provided there is some significant humidity or cloud there. The question is, what kind of different clouds are there? Perhaps you think there are a lot. There are, in fact, only two kinds of cloud. Good clouds and bad clouds. Consider if you draw a cumulus. Draw the airflows as you would to a basic student. Cumulus classification cloud. Of course, you look immediately at that and you know that it's wrong. Why? Well, it's misspelt for starters, and even if it was spelt correctly, we would never say cumulus classification cloud. We would say the classification of cumulus cloud. And you know that because you have learnt the language of English. And here you need to learn the language of how the sky works, reading the sky. It is a new language. So here we can see classic clouds which are looking good. But if we went charging off for all of them, or any of them, they wouldn't all necessarily produce the same kind of strength of thermal. And some would be dead by the time we get there. Others would be just embryonic and building. The thing is, we've got to get there, and it takes time. And time means that the sky will change. Of course, if you think about it for a moment, just looking at the sky, there's a big gap from where the camera is taken, where I am with the shot, to the first cloud. Here we're on a flight, we're discussing the sky ahead. And we can recognise the cloud, the moment potentially on the left, is not quite so good, but we're comparing it with the other clouds that are around. And the one top right certainly is looking like it's dead. Again, it's not just the base of the cloud. We can see that cloud tops are being modified in this picture. And it's a case of why and how and what is going on in the layer above cloud base. Clouds in the foreground as well are looking pretty poor at the moment. Or are they embryonic? And again, another sky of different clouds with different potential. Cloud development. If a thermal is rising at 4 knots, then the cloud is developing at 400 feet per minute. So on the left there, we see the wisp generating. After 1 minute, both clouds have achieved a height of 400 feet. However, after 2 minutes, we can see that the cloud in the top has spread out horizontally, whereas in the bottom structure, the cloud has built up more vertically. So the cloud underneath, the bottom one, is a much better thermal than the top one. The highest clouds must be indicative of the strongest thermals. Thermal development then. We get the embryonic bubble, the vortex. As it climbs up, it generates a vortex. It may increase in strength, and if that happens, it will narrow a little bit. And of course, if it generates a tall cloud, we can then end up with the very deep column thermal. The bubble cumulus then. This kind of thermal is seen first thing in the mornings when the sky just starts to develop, or it can be on an essentially what is a blue day or very close to a blue day. The same heat source produces a vortex. It makes a weak little cloud which then decays. And if we look, we'll see that the developed cloud forms in the same position and it keeps changing to a new cloud. And we see this in this picture here. The wind is right to left. The outflow shear and breaking vortex light cycle, this was at Cambridge 2015 at the Open Nationals. In this top one, the first one, we can see clearly the outflow, the horizontal gusts that we see on the string and the airspeed indicator. Here we have the first hints of the cloud forming. So there's one bubble, one vortex. Here's one that was earlier, which is dying. Here's the earlier one, which is dying. And finally, it's all decaying, dispersing. If we look to the cloud to the right as well, we can see the ring, the vortex being generated there. Of course, not all clouds are good. Cumulus clouds spend 75% of their time evaporating, i.e. being bad, on average. Inversions, then, we know we usually consider as being bad, but they're not always. But they are a triple whammy. So here we have warm air with warmer air above. The inversion means that there is a change in wind speed and direction, which generates a turbulent layer there, a very thin, interactive entrainment turbulent layer. This actually causes friction, which causes further warming between the layers. So it reinforces the inversion at that point. The loss in buoyancy breaks the vortex that's trying to rise through it. And without vertical instability above cloud base, the turbulence causes rapid evaporation of any cloud and quickly generates a downdraft, destroying the cell lower down. As fast as it forms, it disappears. And you will never achieve cloud base, or it's extremely unlikely you'll achieve cloud base flying under thermals generated in this way. We can get, of course, as the day develops, an inversion squeeze. So here we are in the morning with our warmer air, and the bubble is starting to rise. As the lower level warms and generates cumulus, the structure will change depending on the strength and depth of the inversion above, and the unstable layer becomes squeezed. As the day continues to develop, we get multi-celled cumulus clouds developing, and the top's rising. As they rise up to the inversion, there's a possibility then that a column thermal will be generated. If it can punch a little bit higher and there's a significant wind there, well, then we can get streeting or spread out. Only strong thermals will successfully break any shear, and that means they must have high humidity. So here we have, again, 3 thermal bubbles. Here we have, it's just being generated. This vortex has appeared. The earlier cell has cascaded outwards a little bit, making a vortex, so it's failed to penetrate upwards. And this one here, the vortex has largely been destroyed, and although it's the biggest of the clouds, it's the weakest of the air to fly under. Clarification of cloud structure evaporations then. Bubble cell collapse sink profiles. So the cell goes up, and the top one, this is a blue day, it merely goes up, hits the inversion, and stops going up and cascades outwards. The early cells would just generate a general amount of weak sink as the cloud evaporates, if it makes a little cloud like the earlier pictures you've just seen. If we get a wind shear decay, then the top of the thermal is blown over, and in this particular case, as the cloud starts to evaporate, the majority of it will evaporate on one side of the vortex as the vortex starts to break. If there's no wind, then we're going to get a shear. If there's no wind shear, we're going to get a decay on both sides of the vortex, the cumulus, and we'll get an equal amount of sink on both sides of the decaying cloud. So structure of a small single-cell cumulus cloud looks like that on the left, but that is what's going on the right. If we put wind shear on it, again, the vortex, all decaying to the right, but what we will see is this scraggy bit on the right-hand edge of the cloud. Of course, large cloud misconceptions. Every vortex, as it goes up, as it hits cloud base, it starts to condense and it will leave some water behind as it continues to climb. Sink generated by cloud evaporation. It's simple to consider that it falls like rain running off trees. So here we have a cloud like this shape. It's a big cumulus cloud, and just the same way as rain would pour off the edge of the tree and then cascade down on the edge and you become very wet there with very little sink in the middle, then that's what's happening in our cumulus cloud. The sink is cascading down the edge of the cloud and it will continue to go down. Of course, the taller the tree, the greater amount of rain come cascading down the edge, in the same way that the taller the cloud, the greater amount of sink we're going to experience as we pass under the edge of the cloud. And a structure like this, well, I'm sure you can work it out yourself. So a structure of a small, well-fed cumulus then, the cells are going up and the sink is cascading down the edges of the cloud. The sink from the top cascades like a waterfall, caused by the outflow of the sinking air by the following bubbles. Here we have a leaning, streaming bubble cumulus. So here the cloud, the big cloud, is still forming itself in the same location. Note that this cloud has everything to do with the wind changes which are above cloud base and nothing to do with the wind from the ground to cloud base. It's indicating that the wind is increasing with height above cloud base and the whole of the column or the whole of the cells are being pushed over as they climb, and they're decaying on the downwind side. We'll get a static streaming bubble cumulus here. So the cumulus is on the same location. There is no increase of wind with height, so the cumulus looks fairly balanced, but again the sink is on the downwind side. The greatest sink is on the downwind side. We can get 4 types of column cumulus. So here we can see a fairly standard kind of column thermal being fed with a stream of cumulus, fairly narrow channel going up, with sink cascading down the edges. Here we've got a broader bubble cumulus, so the top has not gone up quite so far, but it hasn't developed into spread out. So we've got a high humidity there, and it's rather like a street where the gentle downwash surrounding a large hotspot allows a weak but large volume of air to rise, within which we find individual thermals. So the width of the column is broader and the thermals are a little bit weaker than the previous slide. Here I have a tall column cumulus, and the Met people call this towering cumulus. And here we'll get cloud suck as the thermals accelerate above cloud base. There's no change in wind direction with height, and the whole column is drifting with the wind. Again, here we have a broad column cumulus, and here the inversion is trapping the cumulus that's developed, and it's approaching spread out. Bear in mind that there's a broad area of sink around this kind of cloud, but again it's still fed rather like an umbrella. There's a narrow column which is feeding the column cumulus. Here we have forward tumbling cumulus. We see change of wind with height, pushing the top of the column over, and now it's rotating. It's not quite as simple and clear as the standard column thermals when we enter them. The structure is a bit imbalanced. So we can see one here. What will be the effect of the sink? So the green arrow showing where the column is feeding the cloud. As the cloud develops, there's a marked change in wind direction with height pushing the top away, breaking the vortices. There's an inversion there as well, causing the vortex to break and the cloud to dissipate. That generates sink. That sink cascades downwards to the blue arrow, which drives air towards the green arrow, so the whole thing rotates like a combine harvester. Of course, if you look at this slide carefully, you'll see the windsock on the left. The wind is blowing right to left, and it means that the wind at height is effectively reducing, or it could be going the other way, left to right. So if we look at the next slide then, we can see that from the same position, the cloud structure has drifted to the left. The column is still looking quite strong, and there are other clouds just similar to this further left, but if we zoomed out, we wouldn't see the clarity of this particular cloud. But you can see it's rotating itself quite happily as it goes downwind. We can get backward tumbling cumulus here. So here, and the problem with one of these when it's cold enough is we get mammatus. So large area cumulus towering up, wind decreasing above cloud base, dragging the descending air, the cold air back upwind of the thermal. Whiffs are blown backwards here as well, you'll see that very clearly. And we get this mammatus, which is upside down cumulus effectively. And if you time-lapse it, you can see it build downwards. It's very impressive. Mammatus cloud, upside down Q, indicated here, easily extends 1,000 feet below the nominal cloud base. And it looks like this. Well, essentially, it's really cold, super cold air and super cooled water, uh, uh, simply cooling the air as it comes down, forcing it to condense out. Needless to say, perhaps avoid this flying under this area whatsoever if you can, unless you're very high and very fast. You're going to lose a lot of height going under there. And remember, cloud base is going to come down to you. Elongated cumulus then. Here a number of cells feeding a big cloud. Not very strong, not setting up a column because it's cascading off to the left. The tops of the cumulus on the left of this diagram may look okay, but in reality they're not. It's just bouncing along and decaying. And here is a picture of that kind of cloud, where we can see it's towered up and pushed off to the left and decaying. And we can see other clouds are like that in this air block. So don't go to the left of the cloud because all of that is decaying and it's generating sink from above cloud base cascading down. And the clouds in the foreground also are all generating sink cascading down. Large area cumulus, wind speed increasing above cloud base, blowing the descending cold air downwind of the thermal feed. Straggly, wispy, decaying cloud here. We can quite often in the sky get elongated clouds, and it's caused by a thermal bounce. So consider here on the left a bouncing ball. We send it off, and of course we expect it to bounce in that sort of manner. And the same can occur in the thermal. Then the thermal goes up and it bounces around. The evaporation of the cloud can generate a little bit of lift very close to the cloud, and so it bounces along. So it's looking like it's effective cumulus for some way, but in reality it's not. There's only the lead thermal that's any good. The initial or last thermal from the ground, after which the cloud will continue to look good due to an induced bounce, depending mainly on the humidity above and below cloud base. So when we get an elongated cloud, in the early days it's worth not going to the middle cloud, because if the middle of the cloud doesn't work, then you have a decision as to whether you go left or right. And it's far better if you go to one end of the cloud, bear in mind, remember what it looked like, fly along the elongation to find your thermal, climb and come out the other end. You sometimes get false cumulus littering the sky on an active day. The mechanism is similar to a reverse cumulus, but there's no precipitation and it's very weak short-lived thermals. So cloud base is the same, often false indications of a thermal. Reverse cumulus. So here a variable cloud base around the mother cloud. So you get these other higher cumuluses, small cumuluses forming around the mother cloud. And the mother cloud can be a thunderstorm. It doesn't have to be that big, but this is where you see this structure classically. And what you have to do is observe that and then take it to a lesser degree of instability to observe in light showers and similar, or snow showers will do. And what's happening is the air, the rain is cascading down, making the air very, very cold. It smacks into the ground. The air around it, and even at height, goes, wow, it's far too cold for me, and up it goes. And so you generate thermals from quite low down, to say the least, to take you above the cloud base of the rain shower. Showers have a big effect on ridge lift, and these are very effective on and common over flat ground, but the hills destroy this structure at the lower down. you sometimes get a pure, strong vortex cumulus with a greater temperature. And the cloud that it forms is a little bit like a jellyfish. And you can see it here rattling up there. And if you're fortunate, you can, in fact, get carried up in one of these thermals. More often than not, though, you end up with a very strong thermal, and the cloud almost forms around you as you climb, or after you have left it. And so here I am climbing in one of those. Fortuitously, we're just out of the wispy bits. But a very powerful thermal, and the cloud was forming way above the normal cloud base, almost 1,500 feet above normal cloud base on that day. You can get a wide, broken vortex cumulus, a loose circle of short-lived, weak little cumulus, and this would be 2 kilometers or 3 kilometers wide. It's usually generated by a big downdraft, a cold downdraft that's come from quite high, and it's just made a bit of a splash out as it's hit the ground and triggered them. Cloud types then. On the left then we've got the normal single cell. There'll be no cloud suck. If you've got a towering cumulus, then you're going to get strong cells and quite possible cloud suck. When you get a much broader cumulus, you'll get strong cells, very limited cloud suck. Occasionally it can occur, and you get weaker cells within it and bigger areas of sink as the cloud decays. In this cell here, you can see we're up near the coast. This is near the borders, and you can see the cold air has come in, much more humid off the sea, generating some wispy bits of cumulus and scraggy cumulus that lower down to the general cloud base. So this is a block of air that is creeping in this particular layer. If we consider a pattern of circles, because all thermals are circular, we find that the cells can only be so far apart, and what a single cell can be surrounded by 6 cells in a hexagon, as shown here. So here's my pattern of hexagons. Where the ground and sky are uniform, the sky will naturally generate a pattern of hexagons which allow linked routings to almost any direction. So we're almost streeting, but it's not quite as clear-cut as that, and there are gaps between each individual cloud. In reality, because of that then, we make small detours from cell to cell to join them up to get the best benefit. And of course it does happen in the real world. So here's a satellite picture of a very evenly scattered sky of hexagons. And if we want to pick a particular direction, we'll find there we can see a line north-south, and all of a sudden a lot of north-south lines can be connecting to these clouds. Of course, it's just not north-south, northwest and southeast. We can see lines of cloud, and we can parallel those lines across the sky. We can go northeast, southwest almost. And again, there's a string of effective, almost streeting for us to bounce along at. And of course, from small hexagons, we can make big hexagons. So we've got our pattern of happenings. We have our pattern of hexagons. The sky will naturally generate a pattern of hexagons which also give bad routings in any direction. So we do have to pick our way and not just fly the sat-nav direct track. And here we have a Greenland and its streeting. And what we're going to do is have a look at this bottom right-hand corner. And again, we can see lines being generated in this pattern of hexagons. Summary. Reading the sky, bubbles, sync profiles, Momatus, hexagon patterns.